This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We take the source material you send us and really excavate the history and the ideas buried deep beneath the usual stories you hear.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you sent us a stack of really fascinating material this time that challenges, one of the biggest historical claims out there.
And that claim is, of course, that Aristotle's philosophy was preserved, widely spread, and just sort of seamlessly integrated throughout the Islamic world.
Yeah, before it gets passed on to Europe to spark the Renaissance.
It's a very clean, very neat narrative.
It is. It's an attractive story of intellectual transmission. But the sources we have, they suggest a much messier, more political reality. The central truth we kind of have to grapple with is that Aristotle was not integrated into everyday Islamic culture or its law or its faith.
So our mission for this deep dive is to trace that journey. We're going to show that Aristotle's philosophy became this hyper-specialized rational tool for a very specific group.
Secular political elite.
Exactly. And we'll focus on Avicenna. That specialization was the very thing that let someone like him run an empire, but it's also what provoked this profound institutional conflict that, ultimately decided the whole intellectual path of Islamic civilization.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Why didn't this incredibly powerful philosophy just take root earlier? Why wasn't Aristotle immediately foundational?
Well, the initial conditions, they just weren't right. Think about the first time Aristotle's ideas show up in that region. It's under Alexander the Great, who was his pupil.
Right.
But Alexander's empire was so fleeting, 13 years, and it was all about military conquest, immediate administration.
No time to build deep philosophical roots.
None. And the successor states, the Ptolemies and so on, they tended to lean more towards Platonism, the more mystical stuff. There just wasn't an infrastructure to bake Aristotle's logic into how you governed.
Okay, so no solid political foundation there. We jump forward, centuries, into the early Abbasid period, and you have the famous Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. That should have been the moment.
You'd think so. It was certainly a moment of translation, a huge one, but not really integration. They translated Aristotle's logic, his organon, and they did it comprehensively.
Right.
But they saw it as a purely technical skill, a tool. It was incredibly useful for, say, refining Arabic grammar or for structuring theological arguments.
The kalam arguments.
Yes, and for medicine. But it was specialized. It was like mastering a complex piece of software, not adopting a whole new operating system for society. The main OS was still Sharia, religious law.
So the philosophy is just sitting there in a toolbox, separate from everything else.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we move from Baghdad, from the academic scene, to the massive, sprawling reality of the Abbasid Caliphate. It's just getting bigger and bigger.
And this is where the raw structural needs of a state start to take over. The early administrative rules, the ones based on the Quran and the Hadith, they were perfect for a small tribal society, but for a massive, multi-ethnic super empire.
They just couldn't handle it. You're talking about complex things like taxation, military logistics, land surveys, water rights.
Exactly. The sheer complexity just outgrew the existing legal code. So the Abbasids had this. You could call it a structural imperative. If the empire was going to survive, they needed a professional, sophisticated administration.
And they didn't build it themselves. They essentially outsourced it. They brought in the Persian bureaucracy, which had all this inherited experience from the old Sasanian Empire.
And that move instantly creates this powerful class of secular elites who are just focused on management, which sets the stage perfectly for Avicenna or Ibn Sina. He's born around 980.
And he's not some ivory tower academic.
Not at all. He is a product of this administrative class through and through. His father was a khatib, a high-level scribe, a local official working for the Samanid dynasty.
And the location here is key. The Samanids were way out in Central Asia. We're talking Transoxiana, near Bukhara and Samarkand. This is not the heart of the empire.
Right. And that geographical fact, being on the frontier, on the periphery, that is so critical. If you are an official in Baghdad, you are under the constant watchful eye of the caliph and the whole religious establishment.
But out on the frontier?
The religious supervision was looser, and the priorities were intensely practical. Border defense, keeping tax revenue flowing, managing farms.
The day-to-day business of running the state had to come first, before any kind of ideological purity.
Precisely. They needed a rational, secular system to organize all of this, something that functions like a modern treasury department. And the Persian bureaucracy, which already kind of leaned towards this idea of a universal order, found its perfect intellectual blueprint in Aristotle.
Because of his emphasis on logic, cause, and necessity.
Exactly. It gave them a way to rationalize a huge administration without having to argue over scripture every time they needed to create a new tax bracket.
So for Avicenna, mastering Aristotle wasn't an academic hobby. It was job training. It was how you learned to run a state. But even for a genius like him, it was incredibly hard. There's that famous story of the sources.
Oh, it's amazing. 40 times. He says he read Aristotle's Metaphysics over 40 times and still didn't fully get it. I mean, can you imagine that kind of dedication?
Yeah.
What did he think was going to happen on the 39th try that didn't happen on the 38th?
I would have quit after 4. It shows you he knew something vital was locked inside those pages, the key to his entire career.
It was. And the breakthrough, interestingly, didn't come from the original text. It came from a commentary written by Al-Farabi.
Al-Farabi, the second teacher.
The one who had organized Aristotle's scattered works into a coherent system. And this tells us 2 things. 1, Aristotle was the core curriculum for this elite. But 2, he was so difficult he was only accessible through these specialized commentaries. It was like a secret language.
And this connects all the major figures we talk about. They're all state players. Al-Farabi was a court advisor. Averroes was a top judge.
And Avicenna became the ultimate official scholar. A superstar wazir, prime minister. He wasn't just a professor. He was running the engine room of multiple states. He was a physician, a mathematician, an astronomer.
He was a one-man cabinet.
He really was. And he was so good that different regimes, the Samanids, the Kakuids, were constantly trying to hire him away from each other. He had the blueprint to fix their financial, medical, and political problems all at once.
Which brings us to his masterpiece, the Kitab al-Shifa. And we should stress again that title, The Book of Healing. It's so misleading for us today.
Oh, completely. It's not a medical textbook. It is a complete encyclopedia of knowledge. It was designed to heal the soul through rational thought by restructuring Aristotle's entire system.
Logic, natural science, math, metaphysics.
All of it. He turned it into a unified blueprint for how to run both the natural world and the political world.
Okay, so let's unpack that. How does he connect these super abstract concepts, form and matter, the 4 causes, to the very practical job of, running a state or healing a patient?
This is the core of his genius. For Avicenna, medicine is just a branch of natural science. So, how do you diagnose an illness? You use Aristotle's 4 causes. Is the problem the material cause, the body part itself?
Okay.
Is it the formal cause, the structure of the body? The efficient cause, what actually made the person sick? Or the final cause, the purpose of that body part?
I see. So the physician uses this framework to find the source of a physical problem. And the administrator, the wazir, uses the exact same metaphysical framework to diagnose a political problem.
Absolutely. If a province is rebelling, is that a failure of material, like a lack of food? Is it a failure of form, a bad administrative structure, a failure of efficient cause, maybe one corrupt official? The state, just like the human body, is a rational structure governed by predictable laws of cause and effect.
And that's the only way you can manage something so huge and complex. The bureaucracy needed this unified system that didn't depend on who was in power or how someone interpreted a religious text that day.
And that necessity, that need for a stable, rational system, it leads directly to the theological idea that set up the great conflict, Avicenna's concept of God.
Right, because if the universe runs on rational, necessary causes, then its creator must also be purely rational and necessary.
He wasn't interested in the personal, intervening, miracle-working God of Scripture. He was a philosophe, a philosopher, not a mutakalim, a theologian who argues from Scripture. The God of Avicenna was this purely abstract, philosophical, necessary existence.
An adaptation of Aristotle's unmoved mover.
Exactly. It's the ultimate source that sets the perfect rational system in motion and then lets it run according to predictable laws, which is exactly what a prime minister needs to manage taxes and armies. It gave his administrative class total philosophical independence from the religious class.
And that institutional independence is what leads directly to the clash. Because if the philosophers are running the rational engine of the state, the religious jurists, the ulama, see their power base just slipping away. And that's when Al-Ghazali enters the picture.
Al-Ghazali is the champion of the religious jurist bureaucracy, and he is not an outsider. He's the rector of the Nizamiya College in Baghdad, the top institution, backed by the Seljuk vizier. He's the ultimate state religious official.
And the sources point out that incredible time lag. Avicenna died in 1037. Ghazali wasn't even born until 20 years later.
He never fought the man. He fought the system. He fought the powerful intellectual legacy that Avicenna had built, a legacy that was threatening to become a kind of second orthodoxy that the religious authorities couldn't control.
So let's be really clear here. This was not just an academic debate. This was a turf war, a battle for institutional supremacy.
It was a clash of two bureaucracies. You had the secular bureaucracy, Avicenna's legacy, whose authority came from rationality, from falsafa. They controlled science, administration, finance.
And then you had the religious bureaucracy, Ghazali's side, whose authority came from scripture, from Sharia. They controlled law and education.
And Ghazali's big move, his book Tarafut al-Falasifa, The Incoherence of the Philosophers, was a direct strike, an institutional coup.
He had to completely discredit them to win.
He did. He took 3 of their core beliefs and declared them heresy, basically saying anyone who believed them was an unbeliever. The world is eternal. God does not know individual events, and the denial of bodily resurrection.
And those first 2 points, especially God not knowing particulars, that's a direct assault on the wazir's entire worldview. It says the source of reality doesn't care about the details, only the grand abstract system.
It was a bureaucratic declaration of war, but the fatal blow, the most brilliant move, was Ghazali's attack on causality itself.
This is a huge deal. Avicenna's entire system, his administration, his medicine, it all depends on the absolute necessity of cause and effect.
And Ghazali says no. That link you see between fire and heat, or medicine and a cure, that is not a law of nature. It is merely God's habit. God could decide to break that link at any moment.
Wait, so if I'm a wazir trying to plan the harvest, and you tell me the link between seed, water, and sun is just a habit, God might change tomorrow.
Your entire system of rational planning collapses. It's gone. If there is no necessary, predictable causal link, then the entire foundation of Avicenna's science, medicine, and administration is just annihilated. Why bother with rational planning if the world runs on divine whim?
So Ghazali and the religious bureaucracy won. They won the institutional war. They pushed philosophy out of the core curriculum and cemented religious law as the only ideology for the state. And that had massive lasting consequences.
It absolutely did. The defeat of that rational Avicennian model, it led to a stagnation of philosophical and scientific inquiry, especially the kind integrated into statecraft in the Eastern Islamic world.
But the story has one last chapter, because the fight continued for a little while in the West, in Al-Andalus, which brings us to Averroes.
Ibn Rushd, and just like the others, he's a high-ranking official, a qadi, a top judge. So he's part of the religious judicial elite, but he tries to bring Aristotle back to reconcile it all. He writes The Incoherence of the Incoherence as a direct rebuttal to Ghazali.
But he's just too late. The political winds had already shifted.
The timing was awful. His regime, the Almohads, they were caught in a pincer. From the east, you have Ghazali's religious conservatism spreading, demanding more purity. And from the outside, you have the constant military pressure of the Christian Reconquista.
And when a state is under that kind of threat, from inside and out, the secular rational thinkers are usually the first to go. They get branded as suspect.
It's the easiest way to rally popular religious support. And that's what happened. The Almohad regime goes for purification. Averroes is banished in 1195, and they hold public book burnings of philosophical texts. The rational model was finally destroyed in the West, just like it was in the East.
The irony is just staggering.
Yeah.
Avicenna's brilliant system, built to run a state, was ultimately purged by the very religious bureaucracy it was designed to bypass.
But that act of destruction was, weirdly, the act of preservation for the West. Because while Averroes failed at home, his detailed commentaries were translated into Latin. They flooded into Europe and became the foundation for thinkers like Thomas Aquinas. They helped set the stage for the scientific revolution there.
So wrapping this up, what does all this material tell us? The key takeaway seems to be that Aristotle's real impact in the Islamic world was structurally limited. It was the exclusive tool of a tiny, specialized political elite who needed it for the very practical job of managing an empire.
And the conflict that decided the fate of that philosophy wasn't really a theological debate. It was an institutional war, a clash between the secular bureaucracy and the religious bureaucracy. And when the religious jurists won by demolishing the idea of causality, they basically eliminated the structural need for independent rational inquiry in government.
Which leaves us with a pretty stark historical conclusion. The victory of that religious bureaucracy was a choice. It was a decision to prioritize religious purity and centralize control over the kind of rational administration you need for a complex, evolving world. And you're left to wonder, did that victory save the soul of the people, but at the enduring cost of the civilization's ability to govern its own future?
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.